We are hopefully online, everybody. Happy Fridays. Hope everybody is well. It is storming outside a little bit, so I am hoping that we don't have too much noise of that because everything rattles in this house. So, yeah. Let me know if there are any problems with the sound or if everything is working as expected. So yeah, welcome to Friday. Welcome to another stream. And this is the very first stream I'm giving after having worked for Godot for one whole week, which was a really exciting week. A lot of talking, a lot of getting together with people and stuff like that. So yeah, that was an interesting experience. As far as actually working on Godot is concerned, I'm currently still working on the OpenXR plugin because I wanted to get the whole binding system to work. That has gotten a lot farther. It's nearly done, or at least as far as I want to take it for this plugin. Unfortunately, I also broke it, so might see if we can do some more work on that tonight and see if we can get that actually to a state where it's actually starting to get usable and maybe deal with a few of the other problems that we're having. The main goal for me with the action plugin or the action logic right now in the plugin was to remove, well, not really remove the hard-coded parts because in order for it to work in a way that the current version of Godot works and that it's compatible with the other plugins, we need to have a number of bindings in place that we can use and react on and make our old controller options or solution work. So that's something that I'm working for, trying to implement right now, but trying to get it in a way that basically everything is based on a nice JSON configuration. So we basically have two. We have one that builds up the action set, and I've gutted most of the things right now because I'm testing to get this to work. And then we have the interaction profiles for the individual controllers. Now, this is right now hard-coded in code, which I may keep because this default setup is hard-coded. Is something that we shouldn't change. The only part of that we might want to change is that we might want to rename the set name because someone who will release their game doesn't want the set to be called Godot. They might want to have their own name on that set. So that's something that we may need to look at. One of the interesting things there that I found that I'm sort of going back and forth with is that the action sets, once they are applied on OpenXR, once we initialize and we actually push them out, they are sort of set in stone at that point in time. You can change them, but there are some interesting consequences of that. And I'm pretty new to that part of it at this point in time. So I'm kind of working my way through that and trying to figure out, okay, what is possible, what isn't possible. So I haven't really made up my mind yet with where I want to take that, and especially, of course, how we want to go and do this in Godot 4, because that's the real goal, is finally getting VR to work in Godot 4. I'm finally starting on that next week. And one of the parts of that is, okay, the action system in OpenXR is really where the industry is heading to. So using that as a base for Godot 4 to improve the system is really, it sounds like the right way forward. Hi Rodzilla, how you going? Just to reiterate at the start of the stream, because I don't know how many people were actually tuned in when we started, it is very windy outside. It's the weather is not ideal at the moment, and my house rattles. So I really hope that is not coming through on stream, because my windows are making quite a bit of noise. It's annoying the heck out of me, but it is what it is. So yeah, this week was really about finishing off or getting as far as I possibly could with the action system as it is currently in the Godot OpenXR plugin. So the plugin is what we're currently using for Godot 3 development, just to really figure out how the system works. Now, Christoph Haag is the one who made the first version of it, so he obviously knew exactly how things worked. And I'm sort of catching up on how he implemented things and trying to sort of polish it up and make it better. And again, whether I took the right approach there, I'm not sure yet. This is my first attempt at making this work. Do you think we will see nodes or plugins to easily implement stuff like full body like being part of Godot? Or is it more an asset store thing? Okay. Loud and clear, no wind noise. That's very good, Rogila. Magnus, that is a really good question. The conversations that I've been a part of on that subject is that well, there's two things that are happening on the whole physics topic. The first is that what's his name? I talked to him, Camille, I think his real name is. I forgot his online name. He's a recent hire who is being tasked to work on physics in Godot 4. Basically, the current plan for Godot 4 is actually to go back to the internal physics engine that Godot had prior to us switching over to Bullet and extracting Bullet to make that an optional plugin. And in that same line to allow other physics engines to be plugged into Godot and use the core system and build on top of that, so that we could have like physics support if we wanted to. However, the work that Camille is currently doing around physics on the original Godot physics engine, the one that Jean originally wrote in Godot, and it's still used for 2D physics, if I'm not mistaken, that is getting some serious work. So yeah, expect the physics engine to first of all be a lot less buggy, but more importantly, it's going to be a lot more performance. There's a lot of work being done in making that good. Now, when we look at enhancing or adding logic on top of the physics engine, the physics engine itself handles checking, whether objects collide, making sure that objects move in the right way when they bounce off of things, or when they fall under the influence of gravity, that sort of thing. So all that is handled in the physics engine. But then when you look at higher level things built on top of that, there are things that aren't really a physics engine, that are implementations built on top of physics engine. And a really good example of that is IK. The other really good example of that is Vehicle Body, which is currently obviously a node supported in the core. And the long-standing wish that has always been outed by people is to have that be plugins, be things that we can optionally add into a game, because not everybody needs those. And while something like a Vehicle Body is very small, you might save a couple of 100 bytes if you take it out of the core. When you add all those things together, you could you have quite a bit of logic inside of the core that a lot of people don't ever use. So that is something that, as far as I'm aware of, is being worked on as making it easier to have those things as plugins. I know that Vanen George is working on greatly improving GD native support in Godot 4, so that it just becomes easier to create these plugins. And I think that when you look at things like Vehicle Body, or a replacement for Vehicle Body, obviously Vehicle Body is a very simple, old-fashioned approach to vehicle physics. There are much more modern things. They don't really belong in the core of the engine, because it just bloat. So having the ability to write that as plugins, that is really what we would like to accomplish. Hi SSLX, I hope you're having a good night or morning or whatever time of day it is for you. So yeah, I'm also a big fan of making sure that those things become plugins. Now, the last part of that discussion, of course, is who does the work, right? That is, I think, the biggest problem that we have when you look at the discussions that are being had around Godot. A lot of people, complaining about Godot not having certain features, or I think we get an email a week on the support line of someone like, Godot is never going to be successful if it doesn't have feature X. Godot, while we now have, and I'm now part of that team, we have a core team of people who are paid to do stuff. That is still a really small team that can only handle a certain amount of work. So a lot of these things we want to solve as things that contributors can do. But that means you have to have a contributor that is actually going to do that sort of work. Yeah, VR chat is. I know that there's a couple of guys who are actually trying to make a VR chat type game in Godot, and they're doing some really cool work with it. Ernest iFire is one of the people who's involved with that, who's really pushing for UK. No, it's morning. Very good. So I'm actually I'm gonna have a really late night tonight because I'm gonna have my stream until 12. So you guys have me until midnight. And then it seems that we are having a meeting with the Android team to discuss how we are going to do certain things in the Android build of Godot, seeing we need that for, if we want to have the Quest working Godot for, kind of important. So yeah, that's why I've got a bit of a hard out today, but it's going to be a late night for me. So yeah, mornings are good. And you're right, that I think the biggest problem, and every open source project really has that, is people are used to dealing with companies. People are used to dealing with a company like Unity or Epic, making Unreal, where you have a company that is selling a product that is therefore has a certain amount of cash on the bank account to hire people, but also they are selling a product, and that means that the clientele of that product has a certain say, either directly or indirectly, on the feature set in that product, by basically saying, I'm not going to spend money on your product if you don't support X, Y, or Z. I'll go to the competition. And open source, of course, doesn't have that dynamic, and people don't understand that in open source, the economics work very differently. In open source, the economics work like, we have a game engine. You want to build a game with that game engine to be, to make money, because, you build a game, you sell that game, you make some money, and you use, an open source engine because you can add stuff to it or help fix stuff that stop you from releasing your game or making your game. Because if you need a certain feature and you go to Unreal and Unreal says, well, I don't care about that feature, you're not our target market, then you're stuffed, right? While with Godot, you have the chance to build that feature and then choose to contribute that feature to the project so that other people can also use what you've built. And it's a give and take thing. I build something that you can use, you build something that I can use. We are both moving forward. There's, of course, a lot of people who use the open source projects and don't contribute, or at least don't contribute in the form of code. But that's fine too, because the more people use an open source product, the more popular it gets, the more well-known it gets, the more it attracts people who will contribute fixes, who will contribute new functionality. And the thing that I personally really like about that whole dynamic is, as a result, the only things that are worked upon are generally things that someone actually needs. So you don't get I want this feature because that's the only way that I can make my game, and someone makes that feature, and then the person who said that figures out that they can't actually make that game because they don't have the team, they don't have the skills, they don't have the time, and you suddenly have bloat in your engine because someone shouted really loudly, "We really need this." Um, and that's much less likely to happen in an open source environment because someone is not going to invest 3-4 months of their time to build a feature if they don't have use for it. And there are, of course, exceptions to the rules. People like me who do it as a hobby, who just do it because we love, building this sort of stuff, or people who build something because they're simply paid to do something that someone takes out a contract that says, "I need this feature in Godot. You go and build it. Here's some money to build it." So yeah. Let me catch up. Oh, that's pretty cool, Magnus. That sounds really nice. Wouldn't want to mind seeing some more of what you're working on. That sounds like a cool project. And yeah, as always, that's the thing, right? There is no company behind. It's really funny because obviously I come from business software. Game development was something that I was really into when I was a teenager. After I got a paying job in business software, I kept it up as a hobby. Eventually, VR came out, and that's really what sort of accelerated everything because I really loved VR and I wanted to get into that. And suddenly, I started spending lots and lots of hours on building support for Godot, and now suddenly I'm able to do it full time, which is just amazing. But then when I talk to my peers, when I talk to the people that I know who work in business software, who are sort of going like, "Okay, how do you get paid?" And you know, uh, what are you working for? Where's the income? And there is none because Godot is free. It's all on donations, and that's somewhere that's really scary because on one side, if Godot keeps growing in popularity, um, and we keep proving that we can actually do these things and grow, and bigger game studios get interested in using Godot for their games, then you will see that more and more bigger names in the industry are going to say like, "Hey, we we want Godot to succeed because that is in our interest." Either because we are making a game with Godot, or like companies like Valve and Facebook Reality Labs and those sort of companies who are saying, "Well, we actually want to give money here because we guys want you to improve your VR support, because if that means that developers get into have more choice to get into VR, they're going to make more VR games, and we're going to sell more VR hardware." Or if Valve and Epic, even a broader net, right? They're just simply saying, "Hey, as long as people want to make games with Godot, we want to see you guys succeed, because the more games are made, whether they're made in Godot or not, but if Godot is strong, then more games will be made in Godot. That means more games will be published on our stores, which means we get 30% of every sale, and we're happy, right? That's the whole dynamic. But at the same time, it could be that tomorrow, well, not tomorrow because we we have the income for at least a year, if not two, to keep on developing VR in Godot. But if after that the popularity of Godot as a VR tool does not grow, and the industry says, "Well, that was a nice experiment. You guys just keep on making normal games. That's what we support. But this whole VR thing is a failed experiment," then I'm out of a job. Because the only way that we can hire is if these bigger companies, donate money to the project. Yeah, VR is and game development in general. This is the big difference between when I was a teenager getting into games in the late 80s, early 90s, 1990s for you guys, last century. I'm old, I know. We didn't have game engines, right? I remember vividly that when I started learning how to make games, and didn't know anything. All that I had was a book that I wish I could find a copy of. It was actually a Dutch. I'm from Holland originally. It was actually a Dutch programming book in BASIC that taught you how to make simple text games, text adventures, or text-driven games in BASIC. That's where I started, and then eventually we got better computers. My father, who was into programming, got the whole Borland suite. So we had Turbo Pascal and Turbo C and Turbo C++. I had access to all those things, and I remember vividly that I learned those languages, and I kept switching between C and Pascal, and eventually settled on Pascal. I in my early teens, I was a Pascal programmer. That was the language that I originally fell in love with before I became a C programmer. And Turbo had this really cool graphics library that you could draw polygons with and lines with and all that sort of thing. So that's where you naturally started. But it was slow. It was incredibly slow. And I had no idea how to then actually turn that into the games that I was seeing people making. Now, for me, two things changed. One was that I discovered this thing called the demo scene, which is where people make 3D engines and 2D engines, if you can call them that, to make just visual artwork with. So combine music with moving objects on screen and turn it into a mini computer equivalent of an MTV video clip, basically. But then the programmer's equivalent of that. So that's what I got into. And the other thing that happened was that in those days there was I think it still exists actually. There was a magazine called Dr. Dobbs. And my father, being into, a big computer hobbyist and, his work in computers, he kept buying this magazine. He found that fascinating. And at some point in time, Michael Abrash ran a whole series where he explained how to build a rasterizer. So basically, how do you draw a polygon on screen, but you do it fast? And that was the eye opener. That was the moment where I really went like, oh, this is cool. I can do this. I can learn this, and I can do cool stuff with it. But that was the time that I was in, right? You had to not just know the programming language, you had to know how the computer worked internally. And we were writing directly into graphics memory at that point in time. There was no GPU acceleration. So you had to learn how to write all these things in order to make a game. And while there were some game engines in those days, eventually companies like ID Software did that, right? So, what's his face? John Carmack. Writing, the first Wolfenstein engine, and they already caught on really quickly that they wanted to build an engine to make that type of game with, and they made Wolfenstein 3D, and they sold that. And once the hype was over, the buzz was over, they now said to other companies, hey, this game that we made, Wolfenstein, well, that's actually an engine, and you can make your own game in that. You can make your own version of Wolfenstein. And they started selling the engine to people. That was how those things began in those days, I guess. But yeah, nowadays you suddenly have tools like Unity and Unreal and Godot, where money was the first and only real issue, especially when you still have to pay quite a bit of money to use Unreal and Unity. That's no longer the case. You can download Unity or Unreal and just use it. You don't start paying until you actually start selling your game, and start selling your game really, really, really well. And the sky is the limit. It's about all these technological barriers are suddenly gone, and you can start building games. And this is something that I really like about Godot. Godot being really targeting or keeping in mind the independent studio market, because that's where Godot grew first. Um, Having this design philosophy to hide as much of the complexity of how the render engine does its thing, and just give you building blocks to build a game with. And that's also been, my intention with VR is, we do the hard work building these plugins, and then hopefully, actually making your VR game should be as easy as possible. And hopefully we'll get better and better at that. So yeah. Well, that's the one thing that I find really interesting, Magnus, is I've heard a lot of people saying that. Now, I have one big problem. I don't use Unreal or Unity. Again, talking about my history, talking about how I got into game development, talking about how I learned this stuff. My love for this stuff was building the stuff myself. I didn't want to use a game engine because I wanted to build my own. That's what I always did. And when VR came out, that changed, because all of a sudden, when I started, before I actually got involved with Godot, my first experiments into getting into VR was with, the engine that at the time I was working on, which could do 10% of what the Godot rendering engine can do, because I had only just started rebuilding it. And I sort of went at that point in time, I've built half a dozen rendering engines in my spare time for fun. And every time that I have something that works, I get stuck on the next step, because I love building those rendering logic. What I don't care about is building the music around it, the music engine. I don't care about how I need to interact with joysticks. I don't care about how I need to do all these other things that a game engine does. I just wanted to build that render engine. And when I started getting interested in VR, I switched that interest to VR. I wanted to know how do you work with these things, and how do you make this thing display something, right? That's the thing that I love doing. And at that point in time, I sort of went like, okay, I've got two choices. Or actually, I got three choices. I can do everything again myself and just hit a dead end. I can use Unity or Unreal and learn a game engine that already does it, but that means that I don't get to do what I love doing, which is building the core. I can build a game with it, yes, but I can't build the code that actually interacts with these devices. Or three is join an open source project. And someone recommended Godot to me, and I checked out Godot, and I went like, oh, this is really cool. I really like the structure, just looking at how a lot of the internals of Godot worked. There were a lot of common ground with how I usually build things. So I really very naturally started feeling comfortable with how Godot is put together and building stuff in Godot. And so for me, initially, when I got involved, it wasn't, I want to add VR to Godot. It was, I want to do something in VR. I just need Godot to do it with. And that became good enough that we could add that logic into the core. And all of a sudden, people started asking, hey, Bas, do you actually want to maintain this stuff and make sure that this progresses? Love doing it. So that's how I got into it. But yeah, my point is that I don't actually know how Unreal and I don't know the experience of setting stuff up in Unreal or Unity. I've seen videos about presentations and what they're doing, and but everybody comes back to me and says, it's so much easier to get started with Godot. The only problem that people tend to run into, especially if they don't know me and know my work, is, first of all, it's amazing how many people still don't know that Godot actually has VR support. But second is, okay, so I've downloaded Godot and now I want to do VR. I have no idea where to start. You have to find me on YouTube and find my tutorials. You have to look in the right places in the Godot documentation and find the chapter about getting started in VR, which is a really bare bones start. Twisted Twiglegs did a really good job doing the VR starter tutorial, which is already a little bit outdated, but is a good starter tutorial. I should give it a go, really. Okay, maybe one day I will. Um, so it's one of those things um, where if you don't know where to look, Godot can be really daunting, because as easy as it is to set it up, if you don't find that guide that gives you or that points you in the right direction, it is you're stuck basically. So, man, version confusion. The editor I joke, we go okay. Um, I do have Godot crashing on me sometimes when I recompile stuff. That's the nice thing about being on the front lines, I guess. So yeah, it is really interesting now, because one of the things, one of my favorite things about this week, this very first week, is the last 2 months I have been basically concentrating on my old job to try and do as much as I can to round off important things that I was working on, so that when I left, I felt comfortable enough that that my colleagues didn't suddenly get into a situation where all sorts of things were falling apart. So it was basically the last 2 months, outside of the stream, I had hardly done anything serious on Godot. And then this week, all of a sudden, I wake up on Monday morning and I can work on this stuff, and I can clear my schedule and work on this stuff. Now, my biggest problem right now, the thing that I'm trying to get used to, is because I need to work together with people in Europe, and I need to work together with people in America who are generally awake when I'm asleep. I have changed my day routine, so I basically now work 4 hours during the day and I work 4 hours during the night. And that's a big adjustment, especially when you also have a family and 2 kids running around that you need to take care of. Now, luckily, my kids are now at an age, and that's also one of the things that allowed me to do this. My kids are now at an age where I don't have to babysit them all the time. They're old enough to be somewhat responsible kids, except that they are currently not minding one of our birds. It's screeching at my door. um so that gives me some freedom, but it's still, it still takes an adjustment, because I'm working outside of normal hours that your body is expecting to work. So yeah, that's a fun adjustment. But the other thing which was really, really cool about this week is that I've suddenly gone from, okay, I'm this guy who works in his spare time on Godot. Yes, I am, the person that has been named the core maintainer of VR, but I'm still sort of, I'm not constantly around so that people know that, hey, I'm approachable. I can be talked to, and that suddenly changed. So all of a sudden, I found myself spending half the week discussing things with Valve developers, and I've been, there are some things in the works that I'll be talking to some people at Oculus on a technical level, and there are things that hopefully are going to happen around Android, and getting access to Android. There's hopefully going to be things that are going to be happening around Chronos, and being involved in the OpenXR standard in some way, shape, or form, or all of a sudden those sort of things become possible, and all of a sudden those sort of things become mentioned. And what comes of it, what will happen, I don't know. It's something that will become clear as time goes by. Just going from building this stuff in my spare time, communicating with a couple of other guys who are mostly doing this as a hobby. There's only 1 or 2 people within the XR team right now who are doing this as a proper job, as something that they're actually trying to make a game or an experience that that's intended to make money. It's not just for fun. So yeah, it's really interesting that as a result, you're kind of outside of the mainstream. Well, not really mainstream. You're outside of the core group of people who are currently working on VR, because it's amazing how, we think about, you got Valve and you got Oculus and you got Microsoft and you got HTC. They're all, competing companies. But a lot of the guys who actually design this stuff, looking at OpenXR, they're all working together in the OpenXR working group. So it's really interesting to suddenly have access to some of these people, and for them to actually want to talk to me, which I still think is pretty damn cool. And there's a part of me that feels like I'm an outsider because I am not part of that world. I've always been doing this stuff at the side, but now all of a sudden I'm sort of coming in and having these discussions with people who on one side are opening my eyes as to how some of these things came to be and why things are designed the way that they are, and at the same time the fact that, of course, that I've done everything in VR. I had to invent my own way of doing certain things, is also certainly coming like, okay, hey, Godot works like this. Jean came up with this, or George or whoever build a subsystem in Godot, and I use that as a springboard for, okay, now we're going to add VR in and we want to do this in this way. And suddenly going like, basically the discussion that we're having here in chat, that we suddenly have an approach to VR that is almost turnkey. You put the plugin in place, you add 3 lines of code, and you've got a VR game up and running. And after that, it's pretty damn visual. That is a real interesting departure in how things are structured for us to how it's happening in other engines. While OpenXR, the fun thing about OpenXR is that it's taking the best practices that all these guys have run into developing their own SDKs and their own platforms. And because these guys, there isn't any, as far as I'm aware of, I've been told, there isn't any company politics involved. These are techs who love this new frontier of VR. Where there's also the understanding between the companies that are playing in the space that, yeah, we're competitors, but everybody's sort of going after their own niche within this space, because there is enough of a pie to carve up, basically. So what you're getting is a bunch of people who are really putting their best bit of knowledge forward and designing something like the OpenXR standard. So yeah, coming in late with that and seeing a bunch of things that they're deciding and how they structure it, sort of go like, wow, this is really well structured. And a couple of things where I'm sort of going like, maybe how we did it is better. And yeah, it's going to be very interesting. Well, I would be surprised if I came up with something better, but you never know. You never know. It's a bunch of menu nonsense. Yeah, I read that. Set up a Godot. Yeah, so when we're looking at Godot 4, I need to finish this, and after that, 99% of my time is going to be spent on Godot 4, and I'm really looking forward to that. It's gonna, luckily there's a couple of people like Ernest and I forgot the other guy's name, Deft something, who have already been doing a bunch of trialing in trying to get VR to work in Vulkan. One of the really interesting things that we ran into, which I had a bit of a laugh about, is when we build VR in Godot 3, again, because we are Godot is big in the mobile market, right? Which means that you're on devices where you're trying to limit your resource uses and all that sort of thing. So the whole architecture of Godot is you render one eye, submit that or output that to the HMD, then you render the other eye, then you output that one, and you're reusing as much of the resources as possible because you want to limit your memory usage and all that sort of stuff. Because these render buffers, especially the main render buffers that Godot has, with all the effects that we have in the Glass 3 drivers, that's a lot of memory being kicked around. So you want to limit that to some extent. We can't do that in Vulkan, or not in the way that the Vulkan rendering is set up, because they're, and this has also, again, I think a lot to do with all the work that Sean has been doing for the last couple of weeks, where you looking at all this parallel rendering that he's now working on, which suddenly in Vulkan you can do. Obviously, the compositor in VR, the compositor, by the way, being the part of the VR system that is part of the the OpenXR framework in OpenXR, part of the Oculus framework when we use an Oculus. It's the thing that takes all the different applications that are currently running that are doing something in VR, taking all the output that they do, and putting that on the screens of the HMD. So compositing that final image. It's, I guess, where the name compositor comes from. And obviously, when you start looking at, when they started designing these early systems, you were running a game, and that's what was on screen. Nowadays we suddenly have, okay, you're running a game, and now you have an overlay from some plugin that is showing you your chat on, you got your controller in VR, and you got your chat list here, so that you can, if you're streaming online with VR, and you want to, because you got your headset on, you can't see your screen, you still want to engage with your audience, you can do that. That's an overlay, and all of a sudden Steam itself has got overlay things, so that you can open up a menu and change your settings and all that sort of thing. So you actually have not one application that is presenting stuff inside of your headset. You actually have a multitude of applications running, and the compositor takes the images that all these different sources produce and puts that together to the final image, does color adjustment, because these LCD panels in these screens usually have different brightnesses and different contrasts, so they adjust that so that things look good. They do the lens distortion, so that sort of stuff is all applied. So what they want to do, of course, in the compositor is they want to be as efficient as possible in creating that final image, which means that they have to have access to all the sources. And the last thing, which is really interesting, of course, when you look at things like the analysis that is now being done on these images, so that they can do things like time warp and that sort of thing. So often they need access to the previous frame's image in order to do predictions and things like that, to actually render these in between frames, to make everything as smooth as possible inside of the headset. So yeah, there's some really interesting things that happen that don't really work with the approach that was taken 3, 4, well, probably by now 5 years ago, when these things were first, ending up in game engines. And that means we have to change as well. The current core approach of VR in Godot 3 doesn't actually work in Godot 4, because we are using all these new things. And yeah, so that's one of the things that they found out and ran into. And it sounds very small, but it's actually, it's going to take some redesigning of the core, which is then the stuff that I'm going to be working on in the next months. So I do hope that we're going to be really quick at a point where at least something runs in Godot 4. The current plan is to embed OpenXR as a module in Godot, disable a whole bunch of stuff that we have for the time being, and start with the basics. Make sure that we can, again, see the world in VR. So, forget the controller logic, forget the action logic. Let's just get the bloody thing rendering. That's gonna probably step one that we're going to reach. So there will be right now, VR is broken anyway in Godot 4, so we can disable all we want. It's not working anyway right now. So we're gonna just slowly bring it in, and I can tell you, I'm planning serious breaking changes on the way that we do things with controllers and stuff like that, because of what's on the screen. All this action logic, this new way of working, that's become an industry standard. We're gonna follow that industry standard, and that's going to I don't know what that's going to look like yet, because right now I see some roadblocks in the ideas that we had originally, and we might change course on that. But this is going to be the base. The whole idea to use an action-driven system to interact with VR hardware, that is something that's going to be core to Godot. That means that OpenXR is going to be a module, at least for the time being, as we're working on this. It's very possible that at some point we decide to move OpenXR out of the core again and back into a plugin. We don't know yet. There are pros and cons to both. We never could do that with OpenVR and with Oculus and things like that, because you have to compile in proprietary stuff, and of course we're not allowed to do that because we're an open source project. We can't do that in the core. That's why a lot of these things are plugins, where we do have some more freedom to say, well, part of this is open source, and the bit that we wrote, but it's using proprietary bits and pieces. That's fine, but it stays out of the core. OpenXR being a completely open standard doesn't have that problem. There's one little thing that we put a big question mark at right now, and that is the Quest, because the current OpenXR implementation for the Quest is, again, a bit of proprietary logic from Oculus. And this is one of the things that we need to work out is, okay, is that bit something that we can support without it actually becoming a part of Godot, in which case we suddenly have a problem with the fact that we're open source. We will see. That will be the make or break decision on whether we're going to keep OpenXR in the core or whether we're going to move it back out in a plugin. Now, the other thing, of course, is with all the work that George is doing on DD Native and all the things that we're thinking about maybe or maybe not doing in the way that Godot games are exported, the way that these plugins are built may change. So that's another reason to say, well, let's not build the whole plugin system for VR only to have to redesign it when suddenly all this work that's being planned is done, and there's an easier way to build the plugin. Let's just do it as a core module, and then we can always decide to move it back into a plugin when that work is all done. Quest 3. I don't know, guys. I don't even have a Quest 2 right now. I'm still have a Quest 1, which well, I have a Quest 1 that my daughter keeps stealing from me. So yeah. It will be heavily used in the next couple of months. I can tell you that much, because again, this is where there's a nice overlap between my work in VR and Godot's need to obviously expand on the rendering engine. The core rendering team has looking at everything that's been done with the Vulkan renderer. It's really cool, but it doesn't work on Android yet, and there's even a big chance that we have to make a version of the renderer which is structured a little different and comparable in some ways between the difference between the class 2 driver and the class 3 driver, but not as extreme. More that there are certain techniques that we're currently using to get certain things to work on the desktop, which really only work or are really only supported in desktop GPUs. And on mobile GPUs, because of their architecture, the way that they optimize things, that approach suddenly falls flat on its face. So yeah, we're going to have to do a lot of work to make the Vulkan renderer really run well on Android, which I need to be involved in anyway, because we also need that to make VR run really well on Android. And not just for the Quest, that obviously is, step one. We have Quest support on Android. That's where right now most of the VR focus lies when it comes to mobile VR or standalone VR, I should say. But there are other things on the horizon, and actually already other things currently available that are Android based, and that we potentially want to support. I'm hoping that at some point in time we can start looking at supporting Nreal AR glasses, for instance. So that all requires that the Vulkan renderer runs really well on Android. So that's something that I'm going to be involved with as well, and um, that I hope to start doing stuff on pretty soon. But yeah, I have no idea whether there's a Quest 3 on the horizon. Like I said, I still need to get a Quest 2 one of these days. I am hoping, of course, that seeing that Oculus slash Facebook Reality Labs are the guys who have been sponsoring us and allowing us to do what we want to do are at some point going to say, here's a Quest 3 prototype, make sure Godot runs on it. Although I also will be pretty sure that if that happens, I probably won't be able to be allowed to talk about it. So that I have no idea how that works. Obviously, I'm very familiar with normal scenarios where you sign an NDA and you work on a project like that, and sorry, can't talk about it. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that works with how public the development is. I don't know. We'll see. It's interesting. I'm sure things like that will play out at some point in time, but at this point in time, yeah, I still need to get a Quest 2 to play with. Let's start there first. Often watch movies while playing VR, which means overlay. Well, okay, Magnus, that's pretty full on. Lido cool. Thank God you're not doing any VR, but VR is fun. Why aren't you doing VR? VR is cool. VR is easy. As long as you use the right tools, as long as you use Godot. And ready to use hand models with script to control them with controllers. Okay, Rodzilla. Two things over there. Depends a little bit on what you are playing around with. On the nice side of life, obviously if you're using OpenVR, then the latest OpenVR plugins come with the hand models that that Valve has kindly made available to all OpenVR developers. And they're completely rigged and set up, and they actually move automatically if you use the existing scenes that come with the plugin. There's a couple of helper scenes. You just dump them into your game project, and voila, you have beautiful hands that you can that animate as you actually move your fingers, provided that you have controllers that obviously can detect that movement. On the OpenXR front, the logic is all there. The models aren't there, but we are trying to work with some of the people in the industry to eventually have that as part of this. There are some developments there that hopefully I can share about in the near future. The last thing, obviously, if we go to my Godot tools on GitHub, Godot VR, Godot XR tools. Have I merged this? I have not even merged it yet. I really need to merge this. All right, grab this PR, and you have a bunch of hand models that are reacting based on controls. We actually built those on stream. If you look in the stream history on this channel, you will find one of the streams where we build these controllers. Now, the hand models themselves are from the VR starter project from Twisted Twig Legs. So, they're relatively straightforward, simple hand models. You might want to use something nicer if you can find them. But yeah, you can use those. But yeah, these scripts do it for you. So I actually, because Symbiote put the right hand ones together, and I actually haven't had any time to look at this. So that needs to be on my list, because actually I want to merge that in and finalize that, because that's been. Oh, actually, the fact that you can see that the it's opened on the 31st of October. So look at a stream around the 31st of October. And the Quest Toolkit also has well, the Quest toolkit has got the hands that are actually part of the hand animation library thingy that the Oculus Quest has. So that is a little bit different. And again, this is a thing, right? If you're using these SDKs, and OpenXR now standardizes it, they actually give you a completely animated skeleton that you can use to rig a hand with, and everything is taken. You don't even have to write the logic that says, okay, if I move my finger or if I move the trigger button, then move this finger. That's all handled for you. But of course, if you don't, then you need to do something like this. Godot XR toolspace. Plus that, if you're supporting different platforms, you can't have a platform-specific implementation. You have to have something that's cross-platform. So, yeah, have a look at this PR, and you'll probably find a nice approach to solving that problem. I need to drink a bit of water. All right. Yeah, I'm indeed, Magnus. I'm actually using animations on this one, and I actually found that there are one or two features in the animation tree missing to really make this work nicely. Because we use the blend functions in the animation tree to blend between all the different finger movements. So the trigger moves your index finger, the grip moves the 3 bottom fingers. Can't remember what we did with the top finger. But those movements are individually animated, and then we use blends to combine them. But the animation tree is all ended on actually playing animations, while right now we are saying we want to use a specific frame of an animation depending on the status of a input. So yeah, we had to jump through some hoops to make that work. And one of the things that I've still got on my list that I want to do at some point in time, I actually want to add a new node to the animation tree that allows you to select a specific frame and input that into the tree. Because that would clean that up quite nicely. All the VR plugins are part of the Godot XR, and still, the URL still Godot VR. The Godot XR repository, it's not inside of the official Godot repository. We have been talking about merging them or moving these all into the main repository at some point in time. Right now, we haven't done that. And again, the main reason is when we're looking at things like the OpenVR plugin, or we're looking at the Oculus plugins, they contain libraries that are owned by Oculus and Valve. And there are some question marks about, okay, is that a problem for the mission statement of Godot? Godot basically saying everything that's included in the core of Godot, and by extension of that, is maintained by the Godot Foundation, and thus on the main Godot repository. That all needs to be MIT licensed or similar licensed, and some of these things sort of fall a bit in the gray area there. So that's why we still have a separate repository. Plus that, it nicely means that all the VR and AR related stuff, they're all nicely together. It gives an easy place to find them. Well, the VR plugins are not part of the core. Of course, the core Godot does have the framework that allows you to implement VR, and has the built-in native mobile VR thing, which is basically to do cardboard style VR, and provide a nice test bed to make sure that all the VR bits and pieces work in the engine. That's a lot of shaking and noise in here. No idea how much is picked up by my nice little microphone, but I definitely hear lots of rambling. Long live stormy winter or summer nights in Australia. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing, and again, that's the same thing when we're looking at the it comes up so often. The asset library on Godot, again, falling under the Godot the Godot Foundation or Godot organization, whatever it's called officially. Um, we are not allowed to run a profit store. We're not allowed to run, put things on there that aren't shareable. So we have to be careful on those sort of things, what we put on there, which has a lot of people in the community saying, but we want a vibrant, profitable community around Godot because, Godot might be free and might be open source, but my games aren't and my assets aren't. I still want to be able to sell my assets to people who want to make games. I've put a lot, because while there are exceptions like what Kenny does, Kenny's open source assets, which are really cool, but him finding funding through Patreon and stuff like that and donations, he can make that work. But for a lot of other people, if you spend a month creating a high quality asset and you then put that up for free and maybe 5 people find use of that and they don't pay anything, you can't make a living. This doesn't work that way. The dynamic, the open source dynamic that exists for something like an open source engine like Godot does not translate to every other business. So yeah, and that's the same thing with plugins. I don't mind that the work that I did for OpenVR is all free and shareable for everybody, but I still need to adhere to the fact that Steam has said, well, you know what? If you want to use the software that we've written, you have to play by these rules. And that's their prerogative. And again, those rules are not compatible with, to some extent, with the core of Godot, but they are compatible with doing plugins like this. If we want to, release plugins like this on a personal basis, then we're allowed to do so. There's nothing in the rules of Godot that says that we can't. And that's just what is really the cool thing about the plugins system in Godot. It allows us to extend Godot with, because it's the same thing like, for instance, AdMob. How many people aren't complaining about, they want to put ads in their games because that's the way that you nowadays make money on mobile games. But Godot doesn't have that built in. Why doesn't it have that built in? Because the API towards AdMob is proprietary. We can't put that in the core. You have to do that with the plugin. So before, you had to do a custom build of Godot that was made available by the people who made the core module or the module for AdMob, and not everybody is able to do that. Especially if you're just an indie developer who wants to make a game, doesn't really care about C++ and how to compile stuff and all that sort of stuff. So the plugin architecture that we now have allows us to take that next step. But it also allows vendors to take. One of my favorite examples, and again, this is something that the industry is still catching on to, Sketchfab. Sketchfab at some point said, hey, you know what? We have assets. We want to sell assets. Godot, guys, you wanna use your assets in your games, and you don't want to go through the trouble of going to our website and downloading it and then doing conversion work to make it work in Godot. Hey, we're gonna make a plugin for Godot that gives you direct access to Sketchfab from Godot, and you can download the assets that you've bought directly into your game and develop your game with it. Oops. And that's possible through the plugin system because a vendor is not restricted in any way to offer plugins to their proprietary systems. If they want to do that, and if they want to make money that way, go have fun. We just can't add it to the core. We just can't add it to the central part. Yeah, exactly. The obviously I'm talking about the situation as it is today, the decision making that has brought us till today. Um, there are always other ways to approach things or to do things, and if there is enough will by the community for us, or for the core Godot team to investigate. Um, an example that's been named very often is, for instance, how the Blender Foundation has organized things, where basically Blender is two companies. There is um, the Blender Foundation that maintains I might get them mixed up, but there's one organization that maintains the source code of Blender, which is fully open source, just like Godot is, and that plays by exactly the same rules that Godot plays with. And then there's a second company, also called Blender, owned by the same people, but that's a commercial enterprise, and they run, the Blender stores, and they run the consultancy agency that allows companies that want to use Blender but need developers or artists or something to get them up and running in Blender or do something specific in Blender. They can hire those out. So there's a synergy there where you've got a commercial venue and you've got an open source venue that work together. The product is fully open source, will always stay open source, will always stay available in that way. And then there's a way where the core people can do commercially driven things that then donate back into the open source part of the foundation, and that's potentially something that Godot can do. I know that there are things in the works around that will allow us to do more, and where that will end, where that will go, that's I'm the wrong person to ask. I'm not the one who is making those decisions and pushing those things forward. I'm just very interested to see what's going on there. So yeah. Well, no, conservancy doesn't stand in the way. You just need that two-pronged approach. You need, the Godot organization as it is today, under Software Foundation, to play by the rules that we have. And you don't want to touch that. You don't even want to change that. Even if we, for whatever reason, don't want to work with Software Conservancy anymore, you would still want to keep that structure in place, because that is how you guarantee and commit to that promise that you've made to your community, that Godot will always stay free and open source, that it will always be be available. So and that is also important to people that donate, right? Or organizations that donate. They want to make sure that someone isn't just pocketing that money and making a bunch of profit. They want to make sure that that money is spent in the way that it is intended. And again, this is why we're really happy working together with Software Conservancy, because first of all, they manage a lot of that stuff and therefore give a view to the outside world, like, hey, we make sure that Godot plays by these rules. If they don't, then we're not going to give them access to their financials, or not free up their financials for those sort of things. But also, they're a respected entity. Hold on for a sec. I think someone opened my door and didn't. No, just still the wind doing weird things with the door. So yeah, so that is that is also a signal to the outside world, to companies like Oculus and Valve and Epic, wanting to donate money to the project, for the project to keep moving forward. Working with an organization like Conservancy gives them a certain amount of trust, that money isn't going to disappear in a black hole and make one or two people behind Godot very rich and not really do anything. So that's really cool. That's something that we don't want to give up. Both that promise to the community that Godot will always stay free, will always stay open source, but also that that interaction with the rest of the world that we have an organization like Software Foundation, managing us. But starting a second thing besides that, which happens to be, have the same people involved, that is totally allowed and supported, and because they're going to be two separate entities that hope, that just share people, and where that company would license the usage of the Godot name to be able to do commercial ventures, and in that way donate money back into the main project. So there's options there. And again, how that eventually will work, that's not up to me. That's up to lawyers and whoever else is involved with that sort of stuff. No, exactly, man. And I don't think anybody really has a problem with that, except for maybe a very tiny handful of purists who think that everything should be free. And I'm not one of them, definitely. Power to them if they feel that way. But I like to put bread on the table, so I have a family to feed, and so have a lot of other people. So yes, since the latest 3.2.4 RC1, Godot is running as a WebXR environment. Thanks to the wonderful work of my good friend via Snowpex. So let's see, what's his Snowpex games? Why do I get that on there? That's not cool. WebXR. You see, already other people are playing around with it. How cool is that? But where is Snowpex? Why is Snowpex not the top hit? That's annoying. That's mine. Here we go. Here's our good friend David. So he's a developer that's now he's pretty much part of the core XR team. Showed up about 3 months ago in the XR channel with the question, guys, I want to do WebXR. Where do I start? Can I get help? And through persisting and discussions on Discord, he did amazing work in the last 3 months and got it to work, and it's now officially part of Godot. And this is one of the core things, because again, WebXR is an open standard. There's nothing proprietary about it. So it's just in the core. You don't even need a plugin to run it. So yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. NeoSparks has converted some of his stuff to WebXR, although some of them don't run as well as you want, because they're a little bit overpowered for what WebXR can currently do, at least on a Quest. Obviously, if you run the stuff on desktop, then you can be pretty wasteful in what you do. But yeah, considering that it's yeah, Snowpex talk on GodotCon, that's the other one. And the fact, I still can't believe that was the first one in GodotCon. So anybody who wants to know about it, make sure you watch David Snowpex WebXR session on during GodotCon. Yeah, that was the opening talk. I thought that was pretty cool. I don't know what the order or decisions were, but or what the thought behind that was. But I thought that was a cool little thing that he was able to open with that. So good on him. Yeah, it's really something that I think is exciting, and I he's still working on improving it and adding stuff, and they're now got their sights on making WebXR work in WebXR. So yeah, cool stuff. Yeah, exactly. It's I'm on the fence a little bit, Obviously, I understand the need for walled gardens. I'd rather that they didn't exist, but it is what it is. People need to make money. So yeah, WebXR is a nice way to get around that. But I do think that when you look at something like where mobile development currently is, and even with the Quest 2 being a much more powerful device than the Quest 1, still being a device of limited resources, the resource hungriness, that's the right way to say it, of the web is something that that does get in the way. Obviously, something is going to run a lot better if it's a native application compared to it being a web application. However, that said, that's important if you're trying to make a really cool high-end game for the Quest, and you really need to get every last ounce of performance out of that device. If you're just having fun and building simple experiments, which a lot of indie developers and hobbyists want to do, then especially when you look at PC VR, it's no problem, right? Yeah, you have a walled garden when you are, if you want to sell stuff, if you want to sell on the Oculus Store, or if you want to sell on Steam VR. But on desktop, whether you're on Linux or on Windows, you're not restricted to do experimentation. I can download Godot, and I can download the plugin, and I can build any VR application that I want, and I can run it. I don't have to answer to the vendor of the hardware that I'm using in order to do that. But I do kind of when it comes to the Quest. Even there, you can just download Godot and you can start pushing it out, but you still need that developer account, and you still need to turn your device to being a developer device. So, while for me that's not a problem, I don't really care. So what? I need a Facebook account to have fun on my Quest. For people who want to go one step further, and they don't want to go to the level where they want to sell their experience game. It's still an indie thing. It's still a hobbyist thing. But they do want to present it to a wider audience. They want to put it for free on itch.io, for instance, right? Or for free in the situation for Quest on SideQuest. They don't want to be hindered by the restrictions that are placed on those environments. And for them, I can see that WebXR is a future. Albeit again the footnote that okay, you will run into resource issues earlier, especially when you're a mobile VR, than you would if you go native. So that's the price you pay. That's the compromise you make. Well, you're welcome, Augment. I'm glad that at least you got one very important thing out of this, is that you now know that WebXR is a thing in Godot. What are we doing for time? It's already 10:30. We're already halfway through the stream. I think my idea was to spend the first hour talking, and we're already overextended that by half an hour. So I was originally thinking about going back to either the vehicle demo or the vehicle system or my space game. But because I didn't round off a number of things that I really wanted to get working on OpenXR, I'm going to spend the rest, this last 1.5 hours continuing the work that we did last week on stream and the week before, to just get this a little bit further along, because I really want to get to a point before the end of the weekend that I can say, okay, this is done, or this is now version 1 done, and I can start, on Monday I can actually start working on Godot 4. That's my my plan. But seeing that, I actually want to, from now on in this stream, again, like I said, I kind of want to use the first hour of the stream to sort of talk to you guys, just interact with chat. We now have enough people who tune in to make that interesting, but also to use that to sort of go look back at the week that I've had, and kind of use the stream as a bit of a progress update of what I've been working on during the week, what I've been doing for Godot, because we're officially, I think every one of us who is a paid contributor to Godot is supposed to do blog posts every couple of months to update everybody about what we've been doing. I might as well use the stream for it. It's fresh in my mind. I can show off a few things that I've been working on, and it's fun. But then after that hour is passed, I want to get back into actually developing games, right? The hope or the plan is that I do Godot development, do Godot source code development during the week, and then Godot game development on stream, so that you guys can can see how I am solving problems in my space game or in my vehicle game, or I have a few other things that I want to work on as well. There's a couple of smaller things that I want to throw in between, just as experiments and stuff like that. And I think those are going to be fun to do on stream, just to sort of go through that design process and think process. But yeah, my plan is next week I definitely want to get back onto either the vehicle demo or my space game. That depends a little bit on how the week goes. My space game, I have to prepare a few things before I can do a stream on it again, because else you guys are just going to be seeing me pushing blocks around and stuff like that. It's going to be boring. So I want to find a time to do a few things behind the scenes. But then I want to return back on that, and that's probably going to be the mainstay of the streams. Is going to be the space game again. And then I'll start throwing in some tutorials again at some point. I hope to start working on those pretty soon as well. The other thing that I mentioned last week. Raw literal strings. Probably I am kind of old-fashioned when it comes to how I write these things. That's one downside of having learned C++ in the 90s. It wasn't 2011 yet, so there was no C++ 11. And old habits don't easily die. And you'll see that actually in a couple of things that I've built here, where I use older approaches, and I need to start using some newer things, especially because Godot also. That's one of the things why I fell in love with Godot, is that Godot also sort of kept to. I guess that's because John is of a similar age as I am. Godot keeping to a style that's very familiar to an old school C++ programmer as myself. But yeah, it's about time that I start brushing up on some of the newer dialect things. But for now, I'm keeping for this. And the other thing, of course, is I have this now hard-coded in here, and I have actually got the remark here that we might eventually just move this into a file and just load the file. But for now, I'm just doing it this way, and yeah, that's the way I do it. Now, let's do a bit of a catch up from like I said, I've basically, my whole week has been divided between working on this and having discussions with the core team and people at the various VR places. But yeah, I have changed this quite a bit since the last stream, because the last stream we just started on the action sets, I believe. I've extracted all the classes that were all at the top of the OpenXR API file. I've extracted them into separate files just to make things more maintainable. There is more that I wanna extract. I am not a fan of source files that span over 2,000 lines. I just think that is unwieldy. And when we look at a lot of this code, the code that's in here, a lot of it can actually be put into its own objects and sort of compartmentalized so that it's easier to maintain it. So I've done the same thing with the action set, and of course with the action sets and interaction profiles, that really makes sense because it is a data structure that we're building here. So at the heart is our action set data structure, which and again, this is the reason why I'm doing this instead of directly sending this stuff to OpenXR, is we're actually building our action set definition before OpenXR is initialized, because we want the developer to have the ability to deviate from the defaults that we have set in code. They need to be able to make their own action set and adjust everything accordingly. Hence, we built this whole structure with just the source data. And then when OpenXR initializes, we actually push that data out through the OpenXR API and tell OpenXR all about the action definitions that we have and the bindings that we have in here. That also means, and this is then how OpenXR functions, is that the idea with the game, and it makes perfect sense, is action sets do not change. The bindings change. You can be in a scenario where me as a developer, I've said, I want to support these actions in my game. They're bound to these controls on my index controller, and they're bound to these controls on my touch controller, and bound to these controls to whichever other controller. But then when the game is in the hands of a player, obviously that action set is now set in stone. That's not going to change. But that player might decide and say, I don't like those bindings. I do not want the A button to be used to do this action. I want the Y button to be, because I'm left-handed, I'm not right-handed. I want to swap those things around. Or, hey, I have bought this new VR headset, a new set of VR controllers from this new vendor that wasn't around when the game was built. Hey, my controllers aren't supported by your game. I'm going to add bindings for my new controllers to your game, and I'm going to actually do that in OpenXR. I'm not going to do that in your game. So the action sets are really, they're not mutable once you've defined them. While Godot kind of allows you to sort of do that. So there's some interesting little things to solve and puzzle. But the approach that I took here for now for this first implementation is to have that data structure all populated up front, and then when OpenXR is initialized, then we're going to create everything on the OpenXR side and populate everything. And that does mean that we have a little bit of duplication of data, because it's now still in memory for us, and it's now created on the OpenXR side, but we're not talking about a whole lot of memory. Oh, message retracted. I looked too late. Someone hit what they said. That's a shame. So yeah, at the core are a number of action sets, and this is actually a funny little tangent. I'm just going to go and open this up for fun, because Godot has its own action system. When you look at the input map, that is an action system. And the VR equivalent works basically identical. This is one of the things that made me laugh this week when I was talking to this with one of the guys that we're working with. Is the OpenXR action system really has its foundation in the OpenVR action system. And for all the right reasons, Valve is very proud of what they've built there. This is all inspired by all the work that they've done on all the prototype games and the the tutorial games that they've released alongside originally the HTC Vive and later on the Index, and then of course later all the work that they've done in Half-Life. And it's really a good system. But of course the hilarious thing is that Godot has worked this way for years. So we did something right here. Now, when we're looking at the Godot implementation, is we define the actions that we want to trigger, and we by default we get the UI actions that lets us tag into the built-in UI logic so that we can offer some of the UI components in Godot, and it all works. But let's say that I want to fire a gun, right? So if I'm building a normal Godot game, I would add an action fire. And now I would bind that action to a key. And let's say that I bind that to the space key. So now when I'm in my game and I'm driving, now let's say this is a little game that I control a tank and I drive my tank again. Every time that I press space, the fire action will trigger, and I can react to that, and I can make my tank shoot. Right, that's the idea. And I can then say, well, you know what? I actually also want that to react on the A button on my Xbox controller, or the X button on my PlayStation controller, or whatever, button 0 is mapped to on whatever controller that you're using. And this is the nice thing about Godot is, obviously on a desktop game, both actually are active at the same time. It's not that it's one or the other. Both will now trigger that action. But, I can make my game work with different input devices. And the really beautiful thing about the way that this now works in Godot is if I get a device that the developer didn't think of, and I offer this interface to, or an equivalent of this interface inside of my game, then I can add logic and say, like, hey, as long as Godot has a way to react on that input from whatever other device that I want to support, I can map that into my input map and it will work. Now, the OpenXR action system works very similar, but then instead of binding, keyboard presses and stuff, you're actually binding specific buttons on controllers, but in a way that you're saying, well, if I've got an index controller, use these. If I have a touch controller, use these. If I have a Windows MR controller, use these bindings. So the structure is slightly different, but it's very comparable to what we do here. But what we don't have in Godot is this concept of having an action set. And this is one of the features that I actually think Godot needs to steal from Valve and add to Godot. So the idea with an action set is that you divvy this up into different sets. And it could all be in one set. So this would be our default action set, and that would always be active. But for instance, when we are looking at the situation right now with Fire. So Fire, and actually a better example is take a game like Grand Theft Auto, right? I'm walking around with my character in the world. And eventually I get to a car, and I get into the car, and now I'm driving the car. So when I'm walking around with the character, I have different actions that I want to react to than if I'm sitting in the car. So when I'm walking, I want the up arrow to be bound to an action which says move character forward. While when I'm in the car, I want the up arrow to be bound to an action which says throttle on the car. And left is I want to turn my character left, while left in the car is I want to turn my steering wheel left, right? So you suddenly have the situation that which actions are active is suddenly dependent on the game mode that you're currently in, the game state. Now, Godot lets you do that, obviously, because you just define all those different actions, and it's now whatever game state that you're in, you're just listening to certain actions and you're ignoring the other actions. But the way that Valve has approached it is saying, you know what? You create an action set for when you're controlling your character. And you're creating an action set for when you're controlling the car, so when the character gets into the car. And I'm creating an action set that is controlling the interface when I'm in my menu. And only the action sets that are active will actually cause actions to be evaluated or bindings to be checked. So if I'm in the car, I have the action set active for me driving a car. If I'm not in a car, I have the action set active for controlling my character. And that is a really nice top level structure. So that is something that OpenXR has. We have these different actions, and you can toggle them on or off, and that simply means like as long as they're active, and you can combine them, right? You might have an action set that just controls HUD actions, that it actually allows you to open up the menu and interact with things. Then you have an action set to control your character that's active at the same time, or you have an action set for your car that's active when you're inside the car, but it's always active together with that main action set that's controlling your HUD. But then when you exit your game and you go back to the main menu, you suddenly have your main menu action set active and everything else deactivated. So that's something that we handle here. So at the top level, we have an action set. Now every action set has a any number of actions that it supports. Now, the name of these actions need to be unique within an action set. As far as I understand so far, you can create actions of the same name in other action sets, which is also why it has a priority here where it's saying, well, you know what? If two action sets have overlapping bindings, which one takes priority over the other one, and which action then gets issued. We are currently just working with a single action set, but I have obviously made it possible to have multiple action sets active, which, by the way, is stored in a nice little vector here, which is action set. And again, I am using STD vector. I am using STL here for this because I didn't feel like building my own dynamic container or using another plugin, or this is my only beef today when it comes to using GD native. Is Godot has got really strong array classes inside of the core, which perform the same function as vectors or as dictionaries, depending on which one you choose to use. But the way that things work means that basically you are controlling what happens in the core from GD native. It's not true instantiating. It's not true subclassing. There is a interface layer between them, and I don't like using that if I don't need to. So that's why I use STL in this case. I know that there's some people who frown upon STL. I am actually one of them as far as certain parts of STL are concerned. But STD vector is one of those classes that I actually enjoy using. I think it's actually a really good setup. And it does exactly what I want to do here, is allow me to add action sets to to what I've got in memory, and then allows me to add actions to our action set. Now, when we then go into the action, where is my action.h? It's no longer open. There we go. I'm going to move that there. The actions, they are a little bit more. I'm actually going to space a few things between what is OpenXR. And actually, when I go, I want to actually move that downwards and say populated. Let's open. So we're going to do that in the other classes as well. I think that is a little bit more readable when we're doing things. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. And in this case, we have this one and this one that we move here. So now we can see the bits that define an action. So the first thing is the type of action, which I am using the internal OpenXR types for this. So basically, OpenXR supports a limited number of input types. Oh, and actually we're on there. So Boolean, which is a button. So my my A button on my controller is either on, pressed, or off. Finger is not on. Float is a single value, so my trigger is a float, going from 0 when it's not pressed to 1 when it's depressed. And we have a vector, which is our nice little joystick up here, which we have an up-down value and a left-right value. So we have that. Pose is one of the really interesting ones, which is which I find very interesting when I look at OpenXR, because OpenXR only has 2, while OpenVR has 5 poses per controller. A pose identifies a specific location on the controller. So OpenXR has 2 poses. It has got a grip pose, which is a location which lines up with where you're holding your controller, and that's where you would want to anchor your controller node. And you have an aim, which is aligned with which direction you're aiming in. So that's pointing out of the controller. And that's the idea that if you're holding the controller naturally, the aim should be in the direction that your gun should be pointing. So and which you're shooting. So when you look at this, it's not that. That's actually, you know, in line with my controller would actually be shooting up. So my aim pose would actually be pointing out of, or being aligned with, you know, the horizontal plane when I'm holding control. It will actually be at an angle. So those are the two poses that we have. So poses are locations. Now the problem that we have, of course, is that poses didn't exist when we were building the VR system in Godot 3. So Godot 3 has got this wonderful little thing called the AR/VR controller node that tracks the location of your controller. It tracks one location of your controller. And like I said, OpenVR has 5. Right now, OpenXR has 2, but OpenXR allows us to enhance that with extensions. So that is one of the things that I'm going to have to change in the way that OpenVR, or that VR works in Godot 4, is to move away from a controller that just has a single location to using the poses and making sure that, you know, you use your poses correctly, that you use your aim pose for, you know, aligning something that you're aiming at, and your grip pose for your controller, and etc., etc. And then we have one output. So the inputs and outputs all work through actions, and that's a little bit unintuitive when you are thinking about actions as an input map, because you're talking about actions as something that you react to. The player presses a button that causes the action fire to happen, and I perform that action in my game. My gun fires, my tank fires, whatever fires. But it also works the other way around. The haptics on the controller, so the vibrations that you can do on the controllers, they're also controllable through actions. So you define an action, my haptic output, you bind that to this vibration output type, and now you can send signals to OpenVR saying, go and enable that vibration and give feedback to the user, you know, haptic feedback. And again, they have the one output, but as devices become available that do more, you know, like for instance, looking at the vests that they're making right now, so that you can feel if you're hit by a gunshot or things like that. OpenXR allows the developers of that vest to create an OpenXR runtime for their vest, or, you know, driver for their vest, and either through, you know, if there's enough in the standard system to identify that with, then obviously they can just do it, but else they need to build their own extension which adds new action paths, and you could suddenly have, you know, because that would be locations all over the vest that you can vibrate. So you would have a whole bunch of outputs that you define, and they would all be different actions that you then control. Let's make sure that we follow suit with the other types. So I want to, this one doesn't actually have it. We'll come back to that in a minute, but I want to go and say boom, and move that over here. So then we always have our definitions here, and then whatever we populate once we run there. Now that we're on path anyway, we can quickly take a little detour. For that, I actually want to have a quick look over here at our OpenXR specification. So when we're looking at our input profiles and our inputs, and actually let's go now. So we have, basically we've got two sets of paths that we're working with. I am not looking at the right place. I'm looking at reserve. The first is the thing that identifies the SDK agnostic parts of it. So we have a path that identifies my left hand. We have a path that identifies my right hand. So if I use those, which we will in a minute, I can say this happens on my left hand. This action needs to happen on my left hand. Now in my bindings profile, I'm going to say, hey, for an index controller, this is bound on the left hand. And that means that once my index controller becomes active, I don't want to drop these guys on the floor. my left one comes active, that one now binds itself to that input device. So when I'm interacting with it, I'm just interacting with user hand left because I don't know what devices my user is going to have or use. I just know I want an action that is going to be triggered from a left hand. And then in the binding system, one of the left hand controllers will be bound to that action and actually trigger that action. So that's what we have here. And the 5 that are currently supported are left hand, right hand, our head, which allows us to track our head if we want to, which, interesting enough, is generally not accessed in our mapping. I don't think so. But obviously internally we do use that. A gamepad. So while, and this is one of those things where there's a bit of a duality. Godot already supports any gamepad that you attach to your computer through the built-in joystick system. But there is a certain elegance when you're just doing a VR game. You're not doing a mixed game, which has both a desktop mode and a VR mode. You're doing a pure VR game, is to do your complete action handling on the OpenXR side and not use Godot's input map at that point in time, and just not use Godot's joystick system. You can have everything done through here. Now, the other thing, of course, is if OpenXR ever makes it to, say, the PlayStation, for instance, you, of course, have positionally tracked controllers. So that might be interesting. And then, my personal favorite, if there's anybody watching my stream from any of the Threadmill's vendors, I'd love to have one of your devices if you want to sponsor me so that I can make support for your device under Godot through OpenXR. That would be really cool. So I don't have any Threadmills. I don't have an Omni or a Cat VR or any of those things. But obviously, supporting those devices would be awesome. Now, OpenXR has support for them in the sense that they have they've kept in mind that this is going to be something that needs to be part of the ecosystem. I don't personally know if any of the locomotion devices currently have OpenXR drivers. I really don't know. Obviously, if they have OpenVR drivers, then they, in theory, could work through this if you're using SteamVR. If you're using Steam's version of OpenXR, then that will probably do something. But again, I don't have such a device, so I can't try it out, unfortunately. But yeah, that is on my wish list of things to at some point support. All right. So we also have input subpaths where we're defining input things. Now, all that we're doing here, or all that you see here in the referencing, is that they have standardized some of the name parts based on all the standard controllers that are out there, because these actually are things that are going to be defined on the actual binding. So we'll see that in a minute. So that's going to be very specific to the controllers. And then, the haptic thing for the output, which currently doesn't have a whole lot of things yet. And they talk about extensions and stuff like that. So we'll go back to interaction profile paths in a minute, because that's going to be very interesting. Right now, let's complete our evaluation of our action system. So we have our action set. Our action set has a number of actions defined. And within the actions, we have a number of paths defined. And those refer to those input paths that I was talking about. So if we just define the action and we leave that empty, then that action can be bound to any input. So we don't really care where that action is originated from, whether it's on a left-hand controller or a right-hand controller, or whether it's going to come from a gamepad, or whether it's going to come from somewhere completely different. Then we'll leave that empty. But if we do care, if we want to have it only come from our hand controllers, or we want an action that it's only possible to be bound to our left controller, because I might actually want to create a left hand fire and a right hand fire action, then I want the left hand fire to only have, basically communicate to OpenXR that I only want to map that one on my left hand controllers. And in my right-hand file, I only want to map on my right-hand controllers so that I know where it's coming from. So that is something that we're doing in there. Now, when we're looking at so when we're looking at our action set here, and again, like I said, I gutted everything because I was working on making this work. We now need to start adding all the actions back in. We can see the old approach all nicely commented out over here. So we have our action set. Now, again, it starts with an array. Let's start there. Let's start at the beginning. We give that parse action set an array. Right now, we only have one object in there, which is this one. But we could send multiple action sets in here. So I've made it in such a way that you can choose. You can either send them one at a time, or you can add a new action set later if you're still designing. Or you can send them in one big JSON document, and you can put all the action sets together. So we define a name, localized name. So the name is how we refer to this action set internally. The localized name is the description that is going to be presented to the user. The priority, again, if you have multiple action sets and they have overlap, then the priority is going to define which one wins. And then we have an array of actions. Now, currently we have only one action assigned of type pose. So obviously I've kept the pose types shorthand. So pose for pose, boolean for a boolean one, float for a float, vector2 for a vector, and can't remember what I called the haptic one, but I'll look that up and make sure that it's put in there. And obviously we're going to have to document that. Again, we have a localized name, which is a name that, or sorry, a name which is the internal name. Interestingly enough, spaces are not allowed, capitals are not allowed, else it will error out. It needs to be able to be part of the path. Then we have our localized name, which is then the description of this. So again, and this is where OpenVR is further along than OpenXR, because you do the same thing in OpenVR for their action system as well. But there, OpenVR has got this whole interface for remapping in Steam itself. So you do all so basically the game provides the mappings, the default mappings that it wants you to use. But then in Steam VR, you can deviate from that. Either because you have your own controllers, controllers not supported by the game because they weren't around, or the developers didn't have access to them or whatever. So you can map them yourself. Or if you don't like the mapping, if you're if the mapping are assuming that you're a right-handed person and you're a left-handed person, you can go into that that interface in the back end, and you can override the mappings that that the game provides. And we'll see as time goes by how prevalent that will be in OpenXR. But yeah, it allows OpenXR to present an interface and provide you with the descriptions and names that you've given. And then we have those paths where we're saying that we want to support our aim pose on both our left hand and our right hand. So we track poses on both hands. But we use the same action. So that's kind of cool, is that the actions can come from multiple controllers, and it can work at the same time on multiple controllers. And that will become apparent once we read this stuff out. Now, the second thing that we need to do is, now that we've defined all our actions and the action sets that we have, now we need to define the bindings. Now, like I said, what's really important here is that the bindings that we provide to OpenXR are suggested bindings, where we are saying, here are the actions that we want supported. Here are the bindings that we think are right for our game. But they can be incomplete, or they could be something that someone wants to change. Now, a good chance, if you define the bindings for all the major brand controllers, it's very unlikely someone is going to want to change those bindings. It's mentioned that if someone changes the bindings in a dumb way, they could break your game. So, yeah, that's going to be interesting how that's going to progress. So the same approach that I've done here is a JSON where we've got those action bindings. Now, if we look at the action binding system itself, the thingy has a path. And actually for that, let's go back to our definition. This is almost a tutorial on how OpenXR works. Well, it's kind of cool to have, I guess. But if you look at your interaction profile paths, then we can see that every controller currently supported by OpenXR has a defined path. So the simple controller that you see over here is like a default. So if you have a controller that for which no profile exists, it's going to default back to the simple controller. It's kind of like a fallback controller. If you've got a Daydream controller, you've got that one. If you have a Vive controller, it's that one. If you have a Vive Pro, hey, look at that. We actually have a special one for there. There's some more things in there. Here's our motion controller for Microsoft. So those are the MR controllers. Xbox controller. So, Oculus obviously had the Xbox controller with the original Rift. It's always fun. Our Go controller, even though the Go is no longer supported by Oculus, it's still in the OpenXR spec. Obviously the Oculus Touch controllers and user Valve Index, that's the last one. So those are the ones that are currently supported by the core OpenXR implementation. Now, vendors can apply extensions and install extensions on your system that extend this. But obviously, you need to then know what the new paths are. So right now in my interaction profiles, I just have the simple controller and I just have the Valve one, but there's a bunch of bindings here from the old approach. Eventually, I'm going to make sure that all those controllers that make sense. So there's one or two that don't make sense. So I'm not going to put the Go controller in here anymore because you can't even deploy OpenXR on the Go. It's probably not going to happen. But I'll put default bindings in for all. Now, in the interaction profile, you just therefore have that path. We've defined the binding. In this case, I'm just doing pointers to the objects. These are already owned in other structures. So all that we need to obviously make sure of is that the interaction profiles get cleaned up before the structures get cleaned up. There's no reference counting in these. I've been thinking about adding it, but I think it's overkill for this. And then obviously we have a vector that contains those bindings. However, what I have done is made it so that you define a binding first on the action, and then you bind multiple paths on it. So in this case, I've got my aim pose, and I'm binding both my left controller and my right controller's aim pose to that. And it's smart enough to link that up properly. Now, the bindings themselves that we send through actually send this through as two bindings. So one binding which says the aim pose is bound to that, and then a second binding, the aim pose is bound to the second one. So but I just optimized the way that the JSON is built here. So yeah, that does that, and that is basically all working and running, except that currently it doesn't work, and I still haven't figured out why it doesn't work. And actually, from the last time that I ran this, did I break out of that? Hold on, I'm gonna restart this because, oh, that's because this is coming from our editor, because as long as the plugin is loaded, it does initialize this stuff, which is kind of cool. So we can see that, because obviously I'm outputting a bunch of things for debugging to make sure that everything is working. So I'm outputting the JSON that I'm actually getting, and then we can see that we've got a new action set, Godot action set used by Godot with priority 0, and we have a new pose one. And then we're going to parse our interaction one. So here we can say we have a new interaction profile for a simple control, and then for that one, and then we do the same thing for our Valve Index controller. So in theory, that should be enough to make our controllers work. Now, the problem is that when I run my game, what was I doing here? I don't think I need to save whatever I was doing here. I think we're just looking at the setup. Come on, don't crash on me today, please. Yeah, it's crashing on me. That's always what you get when you're developing things. All right, I'm just going to run this. Now that's going to screw up badly, and the reason why it's screwing up is because I have my headset lying over here. So let's make sure that my headset is actually tracking. My headset is now tracking. Very good. I'm going to put this one uncomfortably on the top of my head. And I'm also going to make sure that my controllers are on. And around. There we go. And I actually want to restart Godot because I want to have a clear log. And let's go and run this again and see what happens. All right. So now we can see that we can look around. Now, interesting enough, these are working because the hand skeleton logic, and you can see that that can move, which is pretty cool. So that is all handled by OpenXR for us. Now, the tracking of this is done through the new hand tracking extension. And the funny thing is that the hand tracking extension is not linked to the action system. So even if our action system is not working, that part of the tracking still works. What isn't working is the post tracking that we are using for other stuff. So I'm just going to close this off. And we are going to go and have a look at the log and see what happens. And start looking at the code and start seeing if I can figure out what I broke, because I do not know what I broke. So what we're seeing here is what we were already looking at before, is we're parsing our inputs. And we're parsing our actions, and we're parsing our interaction profiles. Then we're actually starting to initialize OpenXR. And we can see that here at this step, we're actually initializing our action sets. And I'm dumping a whole bunch of information just so that I know what's going on. So we can see that we have 2 paths registered. The path for our left hand. Sorry, 4, I should say. Path to our right hand. This is just a pointer to that object, because I want to see if the same pointer is used in other places. So we can see our left hand here is used here again. So I know that it's using the same object. So we don't have, suddenly this thing defined twice. We can see that our aim pose input is nicely registered. So who knows? Maybe there's something wrong with that. Yeah, I think that is right. Yep, user hand left input. So they are not named by the type of controller that we're using. They're all standardized, which is kind of cool. We're also creating spaces. That's just orientation stuff. We're not even getting far enough to use those, so I'm not too worried about that. And the next step is that we actually create our action set. So that's our one action set. That's a pointer to our action set that gets created in OpenXR. And then we can see that our aim action is added and our 2 paths are added. So far, everything is being created correctly in OpenXR. Now, these 2 will actually create... no, they still use these 2. So that's all good too. All right, perfect. And then we can see that now our interaction profiles are processed. So we first are going to register a path to a simple controller. We're going to create our bindings. And finally, we're sending that information through to OpenXR. Now, if that didn't work, we would see errors here. So the fact that we see this, that means that this information has been communicated to OpenXR. I need some more water. How are we on time, by the way? We're at 11, so we've got about an hour left. Let's see if we can fix this problem. That would be a win for me for tonight. So repeat the same thing for the Valve Index controller. So far, it looks like it has created everything that it needs to create, and it sent it all to OpenXR without any errors. And then the final step that it does, it's going to do a process called attaching. So basically, the moment that you attach an action set to your session, that is the moment that OpenXR says, oh, okay, that's your action set. Those are your suggested bindings. I'm going to take that all and I'm going to apply that to my session, and I'm going to see what controllers are active and do everything I need to do. Now, this little bit I am not going to worry too much about at this point in time. First of all, I haven't defined all those other actions, but this is the bit that implements our hard-coded actions so that the OpenXR plugin will will work with the old quote-unquote way that Godot works. So it's like a compatibility layer that makes it work in the same way that the Quest works and the same way that the old OpenVR system works. So the same backwards compatibility layer I've built into the action set for OpenVR, so that all the people who have built their VR games the way that it used to work in Godot 3 before we had actions can work with this plugin. Now, the moment that obviously, in order for that to work, we need to complete the action sets and the interaction profiles. But the moment that the developer decides to not use the default action sets but make their own, that will obviously make the backwards compatibility layer fail, because if those actions aren't in there, the backwards compatibility layer can't react to them and can't control Godot the old way. So that's something to be aware of if you want to use the action system and the objects that eventually I will introduce to make that work. You can't mix and match. And that's the same with OpenVR, right? Steam was Valve was very clear about that, even in the way that it works. Is once you switch, you switch. This is where the problems start, which is we are getting events here saying interaction profile changed. And we're getting them 4. Why are we getting 4? Because we have 2 controllers. So the first 2 basically communicate to us the starting state of our controllers, which is that the controllers are not bound to an interaction profile. And then the second 2 is, hey, the left controller is now bound because I've now detected that this thing is a Valve controller. So it's now bound to your Valve profile. And then this guy runs and it says, hey, I'm binding this one. But as you can see, there's no output here. So we get our events that it's updating. So it looks like it's doing what it's supposed to do. But actually, if you look at what it's communicating, it's basically saying that our controllers are not bound to any of our profiles. So either it's not recognizing these as valid profiles and ignoring them. So maybe there's a typo in here. That would be the first thing to check. So if I go to our documentation and we find our interaction profiles and we find our Valve index controller and we grab this thing, that should match whatever we have over here. So just paste that in. Move that over. Oops, that's the wrong one. Let's move that over here. And as far as I can see, I have not made any typo in that thing. So that should work. So that shouldn't be the problem. So yeah, the other problem that I'm wondering about is if I accidentally took out something that still needed to be done after the profiles were put in place. So for that, we are going to have a look at our OpenXR repository, and we're going to look at our existing code here, because we know that that one works. So the big question here is, what are we doing different between the two? Now, some of the code is obviously moved into different methods here. So, but what I want to see is if there's anything around the action system that we're doing differently here. Actually, be nice if there was a way to, can OpenXR, doesn't have a way to say, those are all the extensions. That's not what I'm looking for. No, that's output. All right. As far as I know, we've created our action set. It creates all the paths. So again, this is, we already had more actions defined here in the original one. So we could have a look at suggest actions if there's something wrong here. Then here it obviously creates our action space, which it does for both hands. So that's the thing that we are doing over here. Where are we? These two. So that seems to be happening. And then here it attaches everything to our session. So as far as I know, I'm doing all those steps. Let's verify what we can. So when we look at our action set, create is called. Now, one thing that I really want to do, even though it's a little bit... okay, I'm fine with that. So here, I'm doing a print once that is created. But we know that this runs because that ends up... yeah, because else we wouldn't be getting these IDs anyway. So this is basically printing that a little bit. But it's doing that after the action set is fully created. So the create here first creates our action sets, and then it loops through the actions that are defined, and it calls create on the action itself, which runs, where are you? Create over here. Which we know runs, and it runs them both because we have that output in there. Never have more than 2, or the max right now is 5 because there's only 5 defined. So yeah, oh well, better safe than sorry. Just for fun, I might just do a debug print here. I created 0, 2, name, localized name, and I want to do number of paths. See if it's indeed registering 2 paths there. Let's just restart this so that we have a clean log. And now I need to make a fool of myself again by putting this on my head, or else we get all this error spam. That's something that I want to look at some point as well, is see if we can't make that better. It's enough to give that error once, because once it knows that something isn't available, then it can just shut it off until it becomes available. Right. That's good enough for me. So we still don't see any extra output here, which I'm not surprised by because we didn't fix anything. All right. So we have here created action, aim pose, and our count is 2. So as far as I can see, it has therefore ran through this. Pass. That starts at 0. That just sets the path there. That's all fine. If that's not a null path, we increase it. So that was increased to 2. So we have paths. We have valid paths there. Now, obviously, a lot of this this reporting I'm going to remove from the source code. I've only put it in there to help me diagnose this issue and figure out what's going on. So as far as I can see, our action set is created correctly. So when we look at our interaction profile, and I've got way too many things turned open right now, we have the same thing that we eventually call update on this thing, and it's going to call suggest interaction profile bindings to do that. So let's look at the original code here. So what we're seeing is that is going to be running in suggest actions. So we need to go and have a look at our suggest actions code over here. So the first thing that does, it creates a path for our interaction profile. So it's basically taking, oh, we're not on that anymore. We're taking that that profile string that identifies our controller, and it turns that into a path, which is the same that we're doing here by calling create on our API. And we can see that because it says here, it gives a path interaction profile, and it has a nice, beautiful pointer there. So yeah, we obviously have to assume that that's a valid value. I'm logging that in that create function, by the way. Next, what we're doing is we're allocating a buffer for our bindings using the XR action suggested binding. So we need to create an entry for every binding that we have in our list. So in this case, we can just multiply that by the number of bindings that we have, which in this case is only 2 because we have those 2 bindings for those 2. And then I'm populating our bindings here. So I'm saying this action gets bound to this path. And I'm outputting that over here just to show what we're doing. So that's this one. So here we have our action. So when we look at our actions here, we can see that that is our aim pose action. That is for both bindings. And that's first bound to this 941, which is our aim pose input on our left hand. And then that one is bound to our right hand. So far, still so good. We know that bindings thing is correctly populated. So next we're going to do that. So let's see if we're correct with here. So here, again, we have, we calculate the number of bindings. It's just a different way that the bindings are stored here. So again, it allocates that. So that hasn't changed. Now there's a slightly different way that we fill that buffer, but it's basically the same end result. And then we are defining our buffer here. We get our path from our name, so that gets that number that we have over there. So we put our count in there. We point to our bindings buffer, so that's all good so far. I double check whether our interaction profile, the one that we get here, is actually a valid path. So just in case we couldn't register our bindings, we will, or sorry, our path, we'll get an error there, which didn't happen. We didn't get an error, so that's good. And then we call interaction profile bindings on our instance with our suggested bindings, and that doesn't fail. So we should assume that it's doing the right thing there. So the last step that we're doing is our attach. Where did I put my attach code? Sorry, that's not on the actions, on the action set. So we have our attach here. Now, if that returns true, yeah. So if that returns false, I give an error. If that returns true, I say successful. So we only return true if we reach the end. So if we never had a action set initialized, it's going to give an error. And then it says, okay, let's go and make our action set active. So we're actually doing that in here only for active action sets. So we're only calling this. Oh no, we're always calling that. Hold on. Yeah, because we're just attaching our action set to a session. That is what we're doing. All right, perfect. I'm mixing up with the next step that we have before this. So we've already done the spaces. That's fine. So here we do the same thing. We define our set attach info structure. Put our type in there. Null. count action sets is 1. Perfect. And then we point to our action set. It's called handle in this case internally. Here it was called action set, but that's still the same thing. And then if it succeeds, we're happy, and if not, we give an error. And we didn't see an error, so as far as we know, it has been attached. So as far as I can see, I think that we are creating everything correctly. So the other potential problem is that it's a problem during processing. So that's getting that. We're not worried about that. So that's our create action. We've already done that. We've done the suggested actions. We don't care about that. We don't care about that. It's rendering code. Update controllers. So this is one place that I'm wondering if this is something that is causing problems. So in our update controllers here, we do the same start. Actually, this is a new one. If we're not initialized, we don't want to run this. If our predicted display time is 0, then we are not ready to run anything. Same thing here. And now I'm building a list of active action sets because we're going to call sync actions only on the active ones. Hiya, Gills. How you going? Nice of you to join us. We are in the last half hour of the stream, so yeah, hope you get something out of the last half hour. Or, you know, who knows? You might be able to help me debug this and figure out what I'm doing wrong. So yeah, basically I'm building a vector of active action set records, and all that we're doing here is communicating which action sets we are processing. So we're just adding our active ones together, and we're creating a nice little buffer, and then we are sending that off to OpenXR. Now, this could be a problem that maybe this does not work the way that that I want. As far as I know, it should. I'm actually thinking that we might just do this slightly differently, just for now, just for testing. Const XR active action set pointer active is active sets dot data. So there's our active sets, and you know, the fact that we're calling them twice, I don't really mind. I don't really care. I'm just going to do a Godot print, and I'm going to say syncing 0. I'm going to cast that to uint64, which is always very bad to do with pointers, but for now, that's all that we want. And I'm just going to print out the first one. I'm actually going to put this one back in as well, so that we see that we are actually syncing at least one. And next level rubber duck debug. Yeah, probably. I'm basically comparing the code base that worked with the code base that I screwed up, and hoping that we will find what I screwed up. So what I'm trying to find out here is if our sync actions buffer is actually getting the right values through. Let's go and compile that, see if that works. Let's go and restart this so that we get a nice clean log again. Ooh, we're doing something wrong. Okay. Yes, that's correct. I want to cast this one. I wish there was a tool that would allow me to read out the OpenXR status, so you could see what I actually was doing. Okay, boom. And I quit that right away because I don't want to fill this up and lose the end result. But the thing that's important is every frame we're syncing one action set, and we're syncing this one, ending in 856. So if we go all the way to the top of our log, where we're actually registering everything, we should see that we created our action set, and it's bound to 856 at the end. 856. So we have the right value. So it's not that we're suddenly sending the wrong value for that. Okay. So as far as I know, our sync is working. Now the rest of this is actually loading action states, which is fine. That's all moved into different values, and I'm doing that differently. That's basically updating our controllers on the Godot side. So this is already further along than what we're getting. And even this is basically further along than what I'm getting, because like I said, the problem that I'm having is that we're not getting any events telling us that our controllers are, or we're not getting the proper information there. And that's the thing that I find weird. I'm getting the event that tells us it's mapped, but it's not telling the right thing there. So is that then that we are doing something wrong in there, or are we doing something else that we're missing? We're doing our wait frame, updating controllers, updating hand tracking. We're getting our view, which we're using for our things. And then we're doing a begin frame here. It's in process, OpenXR. So that's indeed being called before we commit our eyes. And I'm pretty sure that in our commit eyes function, again, this is, I haven't even touched any of this code, so I just want to verify how that works. I guess it's that one. Pose valid. Sending that through. Sending that through. And then we say if I is 1, which is our right eye, we finally send everything to the composer, and we do our end frame. Yeah, it works. So this is the code in the original that was outputting our change of our interaction profile. And we were actually getting an interaction profile here, and that stopped working. Now what I have done, where am I doing that? Here we go. So that's in the message handling over here. So we changed that ever so slightly. Hi, Lumberjack. Yeah, sorry. The last couple of streams we've been deep diving into getting our OpenXR plugin to work. So I am sorry about that, guys. I know that a lot of people are more interested in actually seeing me build stuff in Godot itself and not in C++. And like I said at the beginning of the stream, this is going to be the last stream that I'm doing that. Next week, we're going to be back onto actually doing stuff in Godot itself. But I really wanted to get this finished this weekend, so I'm not going to be able to sleep if I don't get this to work and figure out what's going on. So what I'm doing here is I'm retrieving that interaction profile, and then if it's changed, I'm reporting that it's changed. Now in this case, it's not changing. It is always null, and therefore it's always going to be outputting that if I let that go. Now, it's possible that I screwed something up in here, or that I stay using the same session. So that's possible. But I don't think so. I have to go back down to thinking that there has to be a typo or something in our sets. Or in our profiles, because all that I can think of is that it's just not selecting. It's not selecting a profile out of here. I don't get it. What am I not doing that it is doing here? Because again, the thing that I find so weird is we are getting the messages, right? We are getting the messages that say, hey, this thing has changed. Okay, let's just do something crazy. I'm just going to grab all the code that we have over here. Profile changed. There we go. Okay, I'm going to go and comment this whole thing out. To do something. Actually, you don't have to do anything anymore. I think I built all that. You can remove that comment eventually. Let's put this back in. So this is the old code. Oops. Now what it does here, it hard codes the paths that it checks, and then it checks everything and it outputs stuff. So this is completely independent on anything that we've done. If the interaction profile is selected, then that code should show that. Yeah, I need to set up the Visual Studio debugger to work with this. Although I don't think we can really step into OpenXR itself and figure out why OpenXR isn't making a decision that I'm expecting it to make. But yeah, I really should be setting that up. Okay. I should probably remove those. And we can see that all the output is saying no interaction profile for the hands. So the only conclusion that I can make looking at this code is that for whatever reason, OpenXR is not selecting these profiles. And I don't know whether it is because my action set is not being synced properly. Yeah, exactly, Jealous. I know. I really need to set that up. It would prevent me from having to output a whole bunch of things. Although I do I personally like doing this in logs because there's so many different places that all tie together, and we just see the overview of all the values, and we can compare whether they are the right values that we are processing. This is the other thing which is actually really interesting. No, it is doing the first activation of the action set here. Okay, I want to see something. Let's see if what the order is that it does. Yeah, Hillis, and I agree with you. I really need to set up the debugger. I'm just lazy old school bastard. But I do miss it sometimes that I just don't have it ready set up. It's just I'm not a fan of Visual Studio. I don't think there's a debugger integration in VS Code because I'm actually been thinking about switching to VS Code from Sublime. Let's run that again. Okay. Now. Okay, that's interesting. Now that actually makes sense because that would mean that the first time that we run our action sets, All right, I'm going to put this in. I'm going to comment that one out again. I'm going to remove that one. I'm happy with that. I'm going to leave this in because I do want to have a point where you can see that. Yeah, so if VS Code can do debugging, I might actually look at that. Yeah, I do use the Visual Studio compiler. I just don't use the IDE. I hate Visual Studio as a as an IDE. Why do you use the non-Microsoft branded one, Gillis? Why don't you use the Microsoft one? You know, I'm not too scared of Microsoft stealing my code if I use VS Code or something like that. Okay, so I want to do checking there. I'm actually going to go and put a Godot print skipping on type. Getting late. There we go. Let's put that in there. Now the other thing that I want to do before that I just forget is obviously turn this back the way it was because I now do know that that bit was working. We just know that it's not selecting the correct profile for some reason. Okay. Let's restart this so that clear our logs. Yeah. That was a really good movie a couple of years ago about that. I really should watch it again. Did I click that too quickly? I did, didn't I? Click that way too quickly. That's the other thing, of course. That's dumb. Right. Hold on, I'm gonna go and undo this. Put that back in. Because we haven't been using the controllers, they were turned off. So for all I know, that we might actually have gotten different output and not seen it. So let's run this one more time. And see if that has got anything to do with it, whether my controller needs to be around and working. Start at top again. Okay. So we've got our bindings, we've attached, all good. Initial hand tracking, all good. Session changed, 1, 2, syncing for the very first time. Check left, check right, very good. We're gonna sync again. And we still have no interaction profile on these. But we know that it's looping through all those. So it's definitely doing the start of that, which means that we're going to run through is post active. On here. Action state good info. That looks all good. Okay. Godot print aim pose. No. actually make that nicer like this. If effective. Get name. There we go. Let's see if we get anything out of that. Yeah, you know, that's also why we're using Godot, I guess. Now you can't paste links in chat for some reason. YouTube doesn't allow that. And it's too late to do it now, but I am definitely going to have a look into that and set it all up. Come on, I want to see this work before we stop tonight. Ooh. Always make that mistake. Pointers, Baz. Pointers. Here we go. Okay. My controller is still active. I'm gonna keep this here again. Boom, boom, boom. Make sure that it's being tracked because it does make a difference. All right. All right, now this is getting interesting. This is getting interesting. All right. Okay. We did compile, right? Yeah, it compiled. I saved that. All right. Okay. That one is working. We are running checked. Okay. Actions aim pose is not equal to no. Aim pose we did. Okay. Actions is our pointer map here. Right. Okay. So we're looping through these. All right. So as far as I can see, we are calling this. Input path. We got our input path. We're checking if it's null. So that is definitely not null. We're sending through this. Okay. So that's cool. We have that one. We can run those. Can run that. Type is not staples. Print. Close, not initial. All right. Let's see if any of those show something. Because I have a feeling that once we start interacting with our actions properly, that might trigger something. Not a post type. Okay. Okay. Oh, I'm in the wrong place. All right. Action types, pose inputs. Okay. Oh. All right. Helps if we use the right variables, and doesn't it? Here I did the right thing. Here I started doing it wrong. Because that's the state type of this thing, not the type of that. Pose. And that should also be here. Okay, let's see if that makes any difference. Click. Okay. Left is inactive, right is inactive. Okay, so they're both inactive, even though this one's on. That one's still on too. Did something change here? Now we still don't have an interaction profile. But at least we fixed that. That bit is working now. Okay. Time. Actually, do you want to output that? But I don't think that has got anything to do with it. What am I doing wrong? What am I forgetting? What are we not doing? Okay. So we're doing that inside of the event. So it is indeed on SR sync actions that the profile gets selected. Well, if we don't do the wrong action set, then that's not coming through either. And that's doing a count. And there was declared when one or more actions in the action set was created, or null path. If the application wants to activate the action set on more than one subpath, it can include additional action set structs with the other subpath. Using XR null path as the value for subpath acts as a wildcard for all subpaths. And that's exactly what we are doing. Hey, Rodzilla, I hope you had a good lunch. Well, we need to start putting an end to this session pretty soon. I have a few minutes leeway, but yeah. Let's see if there's anything that happens earlier that I might have accidentally lost. As far as I know, nothing up here has got to do with sessions, because this is all the code for setting up a swap chains. Can't speak English. So here's a session that's created. Could it be that we don't have a session? I would imagine that nothing would work if that's true. Actually, let's go and search for create session. So we're outputting that here. So I'm pretty sure a session will be created. Wine. I'm not a fan of wine, but if that's your poison, then go for it. Well, I am really at a loss at the moment. We are copying that info. Those are just chars. Sometimes you just need to check the I'm clutching at straws now. I am clutching at straws. And I bet you once we find it, it's going to be the most simple, dumb thing that I've got wrong. Probably want to take some of this stuff out. Put the skip in there for now. No, actually, not because that would spam stuff as well. I'll leave that in for now. Okay. Let's scroll up to what we really want to see. Creating action set Godot, action set used by Godot. And there we go. Yeah, prints and SLE out still is the bread and butter of debugging, even though stepping through code is often not a bad idea. Although for something like this, I actually think that outputting stuff is easier because of the fact that all the parts in the code are so spread out. Unless you put 100 breakpoints in there and it's too easy to go too far or something. I don't know. All right. Why can't I find my create actions function? Oh, probably because it's create action. There you go. Okay. All right. Let's have a quick look at. No, that's slash user slash hand slash left thing slash user slash hand slash right. And that's our XR path button. Isn't it? As far as I know, everything should be in there. But it might be in here. Yeah, that's only the last one that we did was the input mapping. Because the main one. Oh, wait. Where are you? Commits. Part 6. So yeah, all the things for the video should be in there. It's just that the input mapping that we were working on stream is sitting in draft because I want to do a proper video on that one. So that should all be good. All right, guys. I don't think I'm gonna solve this, and it is 12 o'clock now. I have a meeting to attend to in about half an hour. So I'm gonna start slowly rounding things off and sleep over this for a night. Yeah, I don't know. I wonder what we're missing. I wonder what I really wonder what step I'm forgetting to do. Which step are we skipping? Which thing that we're doing over here am I no longer doing in here? So here's just create action set. So that's just the name and value. There doesn't seem to be anything extra in there. Then it creates all the actions with both those, which I'm doing the same thing. And then it attaches. As far as I know, we're doing all the same steps. Well, we're not going to answer that one tonight, that's for sure. But it is interesting. We nearly have everything in place. I just need to complete the action maps itself. And figure out why it's not binding the profile to my controller. I just have the feeling that there's like one step that we've missed. There's just one thing that I have commented out or that I accidentally removed or something. That is causing it to fail. And I guess it has to be something in this stuff. I got that. We know that output is there, so that's all working. Create action set, create action space, create action. So I'm not sending the wrong create function through. That all seems to work fine. Doing anything extra here either to enable this or do anything with it. Well, guys, I'm sorry. I wanted to solve this tonight. I wanted to figure it out. As soon as I know what I've done wrong, as soon as I know what messed up, I'll let you guys know. It has to be something simple. I have a feeling it's either the sync. Then again, if it fails, we should have gotten output for that. And we verified that the right set was in the data. I don't know. Well, guys, I'm just gonna leave it there tonight because we're just staring at code right now. I'm gonna go and just do a few small finishing touches and then probably check this in. Oh, I suddenly noticed that I'm completely out of screen. And then you know, I'm sure the light bulb will go on at some point in the weekend, and we suddenly go like, ah, that's the thing that I screwed up. That's the thing that I'm missing. The thing that I overlooked. So yeah, I'll let you guys know. Like I said, next week we're going to be properly back on doing work in Godot itself. What exactly, I don't know yet. We will see. Who knows? We might have a little sticky beak at what Godot 4 is doing. There's a whole bunch of really cool enhancements that are going in there that might be interesting to have a look at and do something with. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it there, guys. I am going to get ready for my meeting, and then I'm going to see if I can somehow get enough sleep before tomorrow, because it's gonna be late. So yeah, thank you for watching. Sorry that it's been a little underwhelming in the end, that we couldn't find what was actually going wrong here. It would have been really nice to do the last little bit, because once this works, there is some work to be done on the demo itself, so that we can get proper feedback of the controllers and see that everything is working. And then we have all the basic stuff for the plugin done. So so yeah, that's all stuff that I'll do during the weekend and during the week. Although I hope next week to make a start on a bunch of VR stuff in Godot 4. No idea how quickly that will go and how far we'll get. I'll probably be a couple of weeks before we actually have some basic stuff working in VR in Godot 4. But that'll probably be a nice thing to show during the stream. Yeah, like I said, there's a couple of things that I need to do on the space game before I continue back on there. But I do want to continue on that pretty soon. And I need to make the next tutorial for my vehicle series. We did all the work on the input mapping. And I want to make a proper video of that. So that's one of the next things on the list. So yeah, thank you all for joining me. Again, sorry that we couldn't get this last bit to work. I hope to bring you guys some good news over Twitter or Discord soon, as soon as I figure this out. Thank you all for watching, and hope you guys will tune in again next week. So see you then. Bye-bye.